I've seen Big Little Lies accused of being a romanticized perspective of abusive relationships, and therefore an inaccurate depiction of abusive relationships, when in actuality, it has one of the most accurate portrayals of abusive relationships, or at least the most accurate portrayal in a book, show, or movie of an upper middle class family experiencing an abusive dynamic. Because there is another book and show that I also found was deeply accurate to the impoverished experience of abusive relationships. And if you guys want me to do an analysis on that, just let me know. Or if you have a guess at what the other show is, I'd love to hear it. But before we dive into Celeste and Perry, if you missed it, I have incredible news for people who reserve an early hardcover copy of my family vlogging psych thriller, You Watched in Silence. If you reserve an early hardcover copy and you are in the US or Canada, you are going to get a signed book plate and a postcard from the fictional Salmon Island in the book. All you gotta do after reserving your copy from any retailer, although B&N helps me the most, is to go and fill out the form on my you know what, and this will only be for the first 1,000 people, so don't wait. And you guys are not gonna regret grabbing a copy. The book follows a fan who becomes nanny to a canceled family vlogger on a cozy Washington island, but soon faces both paranormal and parasocial horrors. And AJ Finn, author of The Woman in the Window, has already read it. This is what he had to say about it. Like I've said before, if only 2% of my viewers went and reserved an early hardcover copy, you guys would put me straight on the New York Times bestseller list. You would change the trajectory of my career forever. And now you'll get my signature to put in the book that hopefully we get on the New York Times bestseller list. Now, the number one criticism I see of the depiction of Celeste and Perry's relationship is that it is very romantic. And I often hear people say, oh, well, abusive relationships should never be shown in media as romantic. And I don't agree. And I'm going to say something that's going to sound very weird at first, but I need you guys to bear with me. Abusive relationships actually are romantic. So much so that I think it is the portrayal in media of abusive relationships as not romantic that is the least accurate portrayal. Stories where the man is always just scary and terrifying. He's always screaming at his wife and saying, get in the kitchen and make me a sandwich, and she just is there because she's too terrified to leave. That seems like the most common depiction of abuse in media and just the least accurate one. And I'm not saying that situations like that never devolve, that never happens, because it very much does happen where a man is no longer putting on the mask. He is awful all the time because he knows that his wife is terrified to leave, and that is the one thing keeping their relationship together. And many women are terrified to leave and should be, because that is when they are most at risk of losing their life from their partner. But even in those scenarios, even in those kind of abusive relationships, the relationship didn't start there. What happened before they got to that point? Because nobody is going on a first date with a guy who says that he just wants women in the kitchen making him a sandwich. No one is going on a second date with a guy who screams at her. Why was she in that relationship to begin with? Because it was nice, because it was romantic. And my issue with only portraying abusive relationships in a non-romantic light is that people will not recognize it when they see it in real life. It elicits the wrong reaction from your audience. And even worse, you tend to have the situation where people see these relationships in media as being so terrible, and then they ask, well, why doesn't she just go? Why is she still with this man? She must be dumb, she must be weak, she must be desperate. And then people take those views of these extremist relationships and they take them into real life, and they ask these questions in real life. Is this woman just dumb to stay? Is she weak? Is she desperate? These judgments of these women in these clearly terrible relationships in media become judgments of real women in the world, which, if you watch my most recent video of the show You, they really highlight in the final season why it is downright dangerous to make these judgments of women, why it is dangerous to see women in abusive relationships as dumb or easily manipulated. You know, Marion sits down and she says to Bronte, you make excuses for Joe and all the bad stuff he does, because if you don't make excuses for him, you have to admit that you're one of those women that you secretly always judged as beneath you, as dumber than you. You always thought you couldn't be manipulated. You always thought you couldn't be one of those women. And so when you became one of those women, you didn't see it and you didn't accept it. So it's not just judgmental to see women in abusive relationships this way. It's also risky, because God forbid you find yourself in that situation, you are more likely to make excuses for the man you're with, because If you do not, then you have to accept that you are one of the women that you judged, and you have to see yourself as easily manipulated. You have to see yourself as stupid in order to accept that the relationship is abusive. So you're less likely to accept it's abusive because it's really hard to call ourselves stupid. And you're less likely to see the man that you're dating as an abusive man because the abusive men in shows and movies are so bad. They're so awful. And my man doesn't want me in the kitchen, and my man doesn't hate that I have a job. And my man is nice to me. He's sweet. He's romantic. So it's not like those abusive relationships. And so depictions of abusive relationships as romantic to me are so vital because that is the most accurate, true to life situation. So many people from the very first episode of the show describe Celeste and Perry as passionate. They're the most passionate couple they know. They're so passionate that it seems fake. They do those different interviews from random parents at the school and get their perspective. And that's what you hear and again, that they were just deeply in love. And that's honestly a very common way for toxic and abusive relationships to be described. Again, if you've watched my You videos, you probably know what I'm gonna say, but toxic relationships are often described as passionate because they create a roller coaster of emotions that really appeals to our brain. Because in a healthy relationship, you meet someone and it feels really good and cool and new, and you're like riding the high of that honeymoon stage. But then the longer you know them, things start to plateau, the honeymoon fades, and it just becomes this like stable line. And that stable, happy relationship is great because it's not as passionate, it's not as intense and romantic, but it's somebody you can rely on, it's stability, it's mutual respect, it's communication, it's a lot of great things. But you're never gonna keep the intensity and passion of that honeymoon stage because that's always gonna fade. Unless, of course, you are in a toxic or abusive relationship, in which case you get to have the honeymoon again and again and again because you tend to think again and again and again that your relationship is over, it's doomed, you can't be with this person anymore, you feel that crushing weight of the relationship ending. So your relationship kind of goes like this in the abuse cycle. You're like, up and up, I love them, I love them. And then there's this horrible incident. They've said something awful to you. They've maybe done something physically abusive. You go way down because you're like, oh my God, this relationship is over. How can I do this? I feel terrible about myself. And you feel even lower than you did prior to starting the relationship. So low, in fact, that you need comfort. You need comfort wherever you can get it, even if it's from the person that caused it. And so when that person comes and comforts you and is like, I'm so sorry, I'll do better, things will change, we'll have the honeymoon stage forever, it'll always be good, it'll always be good. You get the honeymoon again until there's another incident and then you go back down. Do you understand? And this is not my opinion. This is like actually the cycle of abuse. There's an incident, there's resolution, there's that honeymoon stage until you get an incident again and you just go round and round. But it is very passionate when it's good. It's just horrific when it's bad. You may have heard the phrase trauma bond, but it's usually misused. People think that it means when two people experience a trauma together and that bonds them for life, but that's not what that means. A trauma bond is a bond you form with somebody specifically who hurts you in this way, who creates some negativity, whether it is emotional or physical, that makes you so low that you crave comfort. They're the only ones who can comfort you usually because you're probably not talking to your family and your friends about this. And so they swoop in, and even though they are causing you harm, they're the one who gives you relief, and that creates the bond. It's positive reinforcement, and it can absolutely leave a victim feeling like they need their abuser to survive. And that's very much what happens with Celeste and Perry. But her love for him is very real, and the romantic gestures are very much real. In fact, they are a necessary component to this dynamic because without the romance, without the grand gestures, Celeste would have no reason to stay. And while I admit that normally I get a little bored of the traditional, like, privileged white woman stories, I think that that's a story we've gotten time and time again. And I'd like to see more diverse stories. But in this situation, I actually think centering the show around a bunch of rich, privileged white women allowed us to talk about things we usually do not talk about in abusive dynamics. Because the thing about Celeste being wealthy and being a lawyer is that she does not have to stay. She could get her own apartment. In fact, at one point, she does. She could get a fantastic job. She could support those boys on her own. She does not need Perry whatsoever. When we tell this kind of story from a position of the main character being impoverished, that's an important perspective to tell. Like I said, I have another show and book that I think really tackles this really well, but it's very much a different perspective that causes us to talk about different things. Because with Celeste and Perry, if there is no need for Perry, we get to just dive into the dynamics of why a woman would stay if she doesn't need to. We get to analyze what a trauma bond is. We get to analyze why the cycle of abuse is so addictive. We get to see what abuse actually feels like for the victim. We get to see Perry through Celeste's eyes, and she sees him as a loving husband, a fantastic father. And in many ways, he is someone who truly seems like he loves his family. He does things like delays a flight out for a work trip so that he can be there for the boys' first date. And he's always flirty and fun with his wife. He seems truly passionate about her, which is something that people always say about him, right? It's a thing that we heard again and again in interviews. Perry loves his wife. And this means something in a world where most relationships end up passionless, in a world where so many marriages fizzle out and the bedroom life is non existent. We get this with Madeline and her husband, Ed. Or a very common situation with men is that they are not great fathers. We also get this with Madeline and her ex. We get these different perspectives of relationships that are really not working. If you are somebody who is Celeste's age, that means you've seen a lot of relationships fail, a lot of relationships not work for so many reasons, a lot of men who seem like half the man that Perry is in terms of being involved with his family and loving his wife deeply. We get an idea of why Celeste created this narrative in her head that, like, actually, my marriage is so great. It's just that there's this one problem we need to fix. But if we can fix it, then it'll continue to be so great. And why wouldn't I fix it? I see how hard marriage is in general. I see how many men fail to live up to the standards that I have. I'll try to fix it with the man that I love. And her narrative of Perry that we get to see very clearly in the therapist's office is that he is a good but broken man. He's not a man who's trying to abuse her. He's not a man who's trying to control and manipulate her. He's a good man with an anger issue that he desperately wants to fix. He's a man who loves her. He's a man who's been so gentle with her while she struggled through so much, like her very difficult pregnancy with her twins. And she says that they have this deep soul bond. And just know that this is like the trauma bond in action, right? This is her actually talking about that trauma bond. It does create this feeling that you are with your soulmate, that you're with the person that you are meant to be with, that you need, because they've created the dynamic where you need them for just basic comfort. I think another important aspect of these therapist meeting is that we see that Celeste is not oblivious to the abuse. She knows it's there, she knows it's happening, she knows it's bad, she acknowledges it. It's just that she's created a narrative where it's a minor problem in an otherwise fantastic marriage, which again, I think is a narrative that a lot of women create for themselves because we see these horrific men in media and abusive relationships, and we get an idea in our head of what an abusive man actually is, that he's this constantly angry, constantly mean monster. He's never romantic, he's never nice. When in reality, most men like this are Perrys. They are men who lean into the narrative that they're just broken men. They are men who try very hard to be nice because they care very much about their image and they understand that this cycle is going to keep them in their marriages. It's why it's important to show more men like Perry. So Celeste holds on to her narrative, one, that he would never hurt the kids, but also that he adores me. He treats me like a goddess. Those are direct lines from Celeste. And she's not wrong. Most of the time, he does treat her that way. That is most of their marriage. And in fact, not only does he not hurt the boys, but he doesn't hurt her in front of the boys. And that's something that she really hangs her hat on. You know, that's something that proves to her that he's actually a good man. But what Celeste fails to realize is actually this is proof that he's not a good man and that he's not just a broken man out of control, but that he is a deeply manipulative man who's making a choice to abuse her because he is in control. If he can choose not to do it around his sons, to keep his image from his sons, to protect his sons, but not Celeste, then he's making a choice. If he is charming and lovely with everyone else but her, he is in control. He's making a choice. But she doesn't see this. She sees a man who is out of control and wants to change. And the thing is Celeste is a smart woman. She's a freaking lawyer. And she has evidence that he wants to change. This isn't unfounded. I mean, Perry is the one who suggests therapy, and for a session, he does go with her. And why would he suggest therapy if he didn't want to change? Why would he say that he needs to change if he didn't want to change? Les was even going to lie to their therapist that there was nothing physical going on. And Perry was the one who volunteered the fact that their relationship is sometimes violent. That seems like a man who's being authentic in therapy, who's being honest, who wants to change. In reality, he's just a man who is a massive, massive manipulator. Perry is constantly feeding her just enough to believe that he can change, just enough to believe that it's authentic. And she wants to believe it, so she does. And I think one thing that we all do as human beings is we tend to assume that other people are seeing the world the way we are, they're experiencing the world the way that we are, and they behave as we do. And most of us are not manipulative. Most people don't want to control our partners. And so we're honest and authentic in our communication. And we assume that the person that is closest to us is being honest and authentic with us too, that they're not manipulating us because we wouldn't manipulate them. And maybe from the outside, maybe from your outside perspective, it still doesn't seem enough for Celeste to be trapped in this cycle, especially when he is so violent. Maybe you are still asking yourself, how could she fall for this? Just because she's got a cute family, because he does romantic gestures sometimes. Yes, he apologizes to her with diamond necklaces, but how is that enough for a woman so smart to fall for this? Okay, yes, it was cute at family dinner when he pretended to be a monster and it evolved into that Nerf fight. But are moments like that with her family really enough for her to stay? And the answer is absolutely yes. And you need to look at it through her eyes because little family moments like that are the height of joy for Celeste. They are everything for Celeste. They're actually all that she has because Perry has made sure that that's all that she has. And he does this by one, the trauma bond, right? He makes sure that her lows are so low that she needs him for comfort. And the relief of being happy again is just so wonderful that it feels better than anything else in the world. What I would liken it to is like you've been lost in the desert all day and you finally been found and you take that first sip of water and it's so much better than water has ever been to you because you had the sun baking your skin and beating down on you and you didn't even know if you would survive and now you have water and it just feels so good. And again, Celeste cannot get that water from anyone else because Perry has isolated her. She has friends, yes, but he does keep her from being as intimate with them as she could be. I mean, it's partially also that she's ashamed about her life and her self-image. She says that in the show. But he also tries to breed conflict with these friends. Like when he gets mad that Madeline bought those Disney on Ice tickets, do you think he was actually mad because he couldn't go to Disney on Ice? No, because Celeste even offered her ticket. That was just Perry getting angry that Madeline had more of a say in birthday plans than he did. And he saw a way to dig in between them and make this Disney on Ice thing really negative, to put a cloud over their entire day that Celeste wouldn't be able to stop thinking about. And with Madeline's play, he knows how important that play is to Madeline, how upset she would be if Celeste didn't show up. So he suggests that Celeste join him for a business trip that day. And when Celeste is like, I can't, she would be livid if I didn't go, he instead cancels the business trip, pretends to be the hero of the situation, is like, I'm gonna go to the play with you. But then he specifically tries to make them late by being intimate with Celeste. Again, he was just trying to sabotage that opening night any way that he could because it was going to damage their best friendship. So he does all he can to interrupt her friendships, but he also tries to make sure that she's got nothing else going on in her life. He strongly discourages her from having a career that made her so happy, that gave her similar highs that she gets from her family. It's no coincidence that the only time that Perry brings up having more kids is when Celeste says that she might want to go back to work. It's a clear sign to us as the audience that he understands that preoccupying her with family is going to keep her from having anything else in her life. Limiting her independence and her career ventures are central to keeping her dependent on him. And we see this even more when she argues on behalf of Madeline's play to the city council, and she says it was such a high and that she doesn't know if being a mom is enough for her and she wants to be a lawyer again. She's so happy, and maybe if she had that kind of fulfillment, if she had any kind of fulfillment outside of Perry, she would be more eager to leave Perry. And the irony is, I think that Celeste sees the fact that she was a lawyer as more evidence that Perry is not a controlling man, that Perry didn't want just a housewife because he loved her and chased her because she was independent and strong, right? He knew that she was a lawyer and he still wanted her. If he wanted a housewife, why didn't he chase a housewife? And even through their relationship being so toxic, she continues to be a strong woman. Like, she never just bends and breaks to Perry. She stands up for herself. She yells at him even when he's putting his hands on her. She's a strong woman. So if Perry wants a meek, submissive wife, why pick a woman like Celeste? But I think of that quote from Trevor Noah, where he says that his mother told him that men want a subservient wife, but they never fall in love with subservient women. They're like exotic bird collectors. They collect a woman just to cage her up. And to me, this very much fits Perry and his style of abuse because he is ultimately a conqueror. He's a conqueror in his job, he's a conqueror in his relationships, and he doesn't just want to hurt women to hurt women. The chase is part of it. He's made a game out of it, and that seems to be what he gets off on. And despite Celeste holding on to this narrative that she's still independent, that she still sticks up to Perry, the thing I notice is that yes, when Perry finally snaps, when Perry takes it too far, Celeste stands up for herself. But if you really pay attention to their dynamic before that, what you'll notice is that she's actually dancing on eggshells around him all the time. That yes, she'll stand up to him, but not before he snaps because she doesn't want to see him snap. And she works very hard to get him not to. Like with the Disney on Ice ticket fight, as soon as she sees he's upset, she leans in and tries to kiss him and he pushes her away. She keeps answering him gently and trying to validate him, even though it's clear that she thinks, like, what are you talking about? This is no big deal. If she was actually able to speak her mind, that's what she would have said. She would have been like, Perry, you weren't here. It's no big deal. Relax. But instead, she's very gentle with him in an effort to not get to that point. And so she only exerts her independence once it goes too far. Because deep down, I think she knows exerting her authority is going to bring on violence. And another way that she tries to feel in control is that she says that she's violent in the relationship too. She tells the therapist this. Like, he may put his hands on me, but I hit him back. And even that part of the narrative of her taking responsibility for the abusive behavior is her just trying to feel in control in a relationship where she has no control at all. Because what's really happening is that she is experiencing reactive abuse. When somebody is very abusive to you and you snap, that's reactive abuse. It's not something that you ever would have done in a healthy dynamic. It's not something you would have done if that person wasn't hurting you first. So it's not at all indicative of you being an abusive person. It's not. It's just indicative of the fact that you cannot push humans to the brink and expect them not to snap back. You put your hands on a person, they're going to put their hands on you back. You scream at a person, they're going to scream at you back. And abusers will often use this against their victims as well. They'll be like, well, you scream at me too. You called me names too, even though they never would have done that if it had not been forced upon them. They weren't the one in control of the situation. And even worse, a lot of the time, abusers who are very manipulative and narcissistic and very in control of their abuse will push you without screaming, without being violent, but they'll continue to say things that they know will deeply hurt you in a calm tone, with relaxed body language, knowing that you are going to snap, you are going to yell, because again, you can only push someone so far, hurt them so much before they snap back. And then they can say, oh, look, you're the crazy one. Look at you. Aren't you absolutely unhinged? But my favorite thing about Celeste as a character is that she is very smart. And in these therapy sessions, we finally get to see her unpack these toxic cycles. And Celeste really only considers leaving once she can finally see that the trauma bond she used to consider a soul bond was really manipulation. Because she eventually gets to a point in therapy where she says, well, Perry's been very loving lately, but that usually means that I had the power. And she basically, in her own words, describes the cycle of abuse. She says, sometimes he has the power, sometimes I have the power, but I get the power when he hurts me. He will grovel and be so sorry and be so affectionate to me because I have the power. But then the bruises will fade and he'll become more distant, and eventually he gets the power back, and that's when he exerts the control. Which for Celeste is essentially just an acknowledgement from her that these romantic gestures, him being so kind to me, are really because he acknowledges that he did something horrible and he needs to be nice because I've got the power. I've got the power to leave. I could exert my power to leave. He's desperate for me not to leave, and so he does all this, so I'll stay. And even then, Celeste isn't eager to leave yet, which is very common because you can intellectualize the situation, you can understand your cycle while still feeling the emotional attachment very strong. And she's clearly still very emotionally attached to Perry and her marriage. But she at least does start to unravel the fact that Perry is very much in control. Perry is very much manipulating her. Perry is very much exploiting the trauma bond and the cycle of abuse. Even in that very last horrific fight that makes her leave, he is so careful about making sure that his sons don't see Celeste in the state that he has put her in. He can go from uncontrollable rage, causing her serious physical harm, to immediately comforting his kids. That is a man who's in control. Part of that control was the romance and making sure that Celeste always felt it, because if she ever realized that that soul bond was a trauma bond, she could go. And if there wasn't that romance, if there wasn't that soul connection, she would have left a lot sooner. And that is the truth with most abusive relationships. So if you ever see one in a show, movie, book that you feel like this is just too romantic, the guy is too romantic, he's too nice, he's too sweet, and you're tempted to say, oh, well, they're romanticizing abuse, what I want you to ask yourself is, are they romanticizing it? Or is it just romantic, like most relationships are? Because people seem to misunderstand the term romanticizing something too. Yes, it is bad to romanticize abusive and toxic tendencies, and there are plenty of books and movies and shows that do that. But the shows and books and movies that do that are not depicting an abusive relationship. They're depicting a good relationship with abusive traits. They're showing these alpha male characters who are actually really controlling, who are actually doing really creepy things, and portraying that as romance without ever saying, no, this is a bad guy. To romanticize something is to portray it in this idealistic and unrealistic fashion. The way that so many romance books and movies and shows portray relationships, portray these men who are portraying things that in real life would be toxic, would be abusive, and just calling it romance, making that more appealing than it actually would be in real life. And a way that you make something appealing and you make it unrealistic is to not call it what it is, which is abuse. And Big Little Lies very much points out that this is abuse. It's just romantic in nature, as it will be in real life. But it's better to show the relationship as romantic and then define how it's really manipulation than to make a romance where your character is very obsessive, very controlling, and then position those traits as desirable, as alpha male behavior, as a thing a man will do if he really loves you. Celeste and Perry's relationship isn't idealistic and it isn't unrealistic. It's very true to life, and you are never supposed to want it. And I'm going to guess throughout the entire show, you never did want it. I'm going to guess you did not walk away from Big Little Lies thinking, I hope one day I find a man like Perry. If abusive relationships weren't romantic, they never would start up. And not portraying the romantic aspects of it is a disservice to everyone, but particularly to women who may end up in these very romantic but very manipulative relationships and not be able to recognize it because they never saw that in stories. They only ever saw abusive men that were abusive on purpose, that were evil to their core. And those stereotypical angry, mean, abusive men just aren't reflective of the kind of men that you're actually going to meet. Men who are charismatic, kind, loving, romantic, willing to change. And it's important to know that a lot of the times those traits can go hand in hand with manipulation and toxicity. And if you guys want me to do the other show that I think is a very great portrayal of abusive relationships, just let me know. And do not forget, reserve a hardcover copy of You Watched in Silence. If you're one of the first 1,000, you will get a signed bookplate and a postcard from Salmon Island, and you will be helping me so, so, so much. Thank you.